I'm sure anyone who's visited Moneyreagh has noticed the memorials to the Blakely family on the way into the church, and in particular the impressive memorial to Fletcher Blakely. Fletcher Blakely was ordained in Moneyreagh when he was in his mid-20s in 1809, and he was to stay there for almost 50 years as minister in the congregation. And at that time there were some eventful years in the history of Irish non-subscription, and Fletcher Blakely was at the centre of many of these developments. He was brought up in a strictly Calvinistic tradition, but early in his education, before he went to university, he fell under the influence of William Bruce, the minister of First Church. William Bruce is often described as the first person to refer to himself as a Unitarian in Ireland since Thomas Emlyn a century before. And he also fell under the influence of the minister of Second Congregation. There were in those days two congregations in Rosemary Street. In fact, there were three, two non-subscribing congregations and a subscribing one. And Second Congregation was to move out to Elmwood Avenue at the end of the 19th century and establish the Congregation of All Souls there. And it was a congregation known for having a more radical approach than some of the others within the non-subscribing tradition. So Blakely was being exposed to new ideas and perhaps starting to question his Calvinism. He went to university in Glasgow and he may have come under the influence of Enlightenment thinking, the sort of new light thinking that had long been associated with the non-subscribers. And so he started to develop new ideas. Now, until the early 19th century, Unitarianism was actually illegal. But by 1820, even in Ireland, this legislation had been relaxed. And at the beginning of the 1820s, an English Unitarian came over to Ireland, and his intention was to try to convert the Irish Unitarians, who were by and large seen as more conservative, to a more radical form of theological thinking. And most of the Irish Unitarians wouldn't have anything to do with Smethurst, but Fletcher Blakely was one of the few who did invite him to preach and who engaged in conversation with him. So certainly Blakely was entertaining more radical ideas at this time. And he was what was described as a humanitarian. Now, at that time, this word had a theological meaning, not the meaning that we attribute to it, although in fact that too would apply to Fletcher Blakely. Blakely believed in the humanity of Christ, that Christ was a man. Now, to Trinitarians, of course, this was a completely obnoxious idea. The Trinity, the doctrine of the Trinity, depends on the three in one, the idea of Jesus as part of the deity. Some non-subscribers were inclined to believe that Jesus was subservient to the Father, and so this obviously was a contradiction to the strict doctrine of the Trinity. Perhaps you could say that they believed in the divinity of Christ rather than in his deity. For Blakely, what he believed in was the divinity of Christ's mission. So while he believed that Christ was human, he believed that he was divinely directed. And in fact, he said he denied that he was a heretic. He denied that he followed any form of heresy. And he once said something very interesting, and this maybe leaves the door open a little on his theology. He said that he did not derive his faith from any human leader. So was he referring to Jesus as leader, or was that a reference to God? Blakely believed in miracles. He believed in the possibility of intervention in the natural order being disrupted, perhaps supernaturally. He didn't believe, however, that these were a proof of divinity, which was sometimes, and is sometimes, cited as proof of Jesus' divinity or deity. Blakely pointed out that miracles were performed by the apostles and also by Old Testament prophets, so that there was no proof of divinity in the ability to conduct miracles, but he did not rule out that possibility. So this gives us some idea of the sort of theological thinking that he had. He was deeply committed to education. By 1815, there was a Sunday school established in Moneyreagh. This is very early for a Sunday school to be developed, and accounts of the time indicate that there were no less than 200 children attending the Sunday school. And at the Sunday school, these children acquired literary skills. And we can see from statistics compiled at the time how children were learning both to read and to write gaining a basic education in Sunday school, and Blakely continued to have a great interest in formal education. He was a farmer. He himself came from a farming background and he actively farmed. He was a member of the society devoted to the improvement of flax cultivation in Ireland. And this is very interesting because we should bear in mind that this is when Belfast was developing as a great industrial city. And Michael Andrews, who's memorialised in a window in First Church, was of course one of the people who made important developments to the industrialisation of the production of linen damask, of figured complex woven patterns in damask. He oversaw the introduction of an industrialised way of using looms to produce this. And so we see Blakely and Andrews, one at the flax cultivation, the other in linen production. He also belonged to something called the Chemical Agricultural Society, and this was devoted, among other things, to the introduction of artificial fertilisers. This was in the 1850s. Now bear in mind that we've just had the Irish famine, which, although it doesn't appear to have had a major impact in Moneyreagh, certainly had an impact on other congregations. And so we can understand why people would have been very keen to produce artificial fertilisers. But William Bruce the Younger was also a member of this society, and so too was the family who developed Mount Pottinger Church. And Mount Pottinger was a very radical congregation. So through his scientific interests, Blakely would have known the Ritchie family of Mount Pottinger. And so these scientific developments we're having also, we see Darwin's theory of evolution emerging. We see all sorts of things having an impact on people's theological understanding, and for some people challenging that. And Blakely was very much involved in the debate, but he was also involved in the debates earlier in his career, the debates that led to the development of the Remonstrant Synod, events known as the Second Subscription Controversy. And that's what we look at next time.